What if the most important mind of our generation just disappeared? No warning. No note. No farewell. One morning, the headlines were quiet. The world spun as usual. By midday, it was chaos. Elon Musk, visionary, billionaire, architect of the future, was gone. And nobody knew where or why. At first, it didn't feel real. Stock tickers started blinking red, major news outlets ran emergency segments, and social media spiraled into madness. People speculated about everything from burnout to alien abduction. But for Claire Bennett, it hit differently. She wasn't just watching it happen, she was living inside the implosion. Claire sat at her desk on the 12th floor of SpaceX HQ, barely keeping her shaking hands off her keyboard. Her monitor still displayed the last internal message Musk had sent to the engineering team. It was vague, almost philosophical. Sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to step outside the system. That was it. No date, no context. Then nothing. Radio silence. Claire stared at the message, her mind racing. What system? What problem? She had joined SpaceX 2 years ago, straight out of MIT, head full of fire and eyes locked on Mars. She wasn't supposed to be anyone important, not yet. She was just one of 100 engineers working behind the scenes, running calculations, fixing bugs, trying to make sense of orbital chaos. But in that moment, Claire felt like she was the only one who noticed something no one else did. This wasn't just a man walking away. This felt designed. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Claire's inbox was exploding. Executives from Tesla, Neuralink, and the Boring Company were frantically trying to coordinate. She could hear shouting from the conference room down the hall. Phones were ringing, doors slamming. No one could reach him. Not by email. Not by satellite phone. Not even through his private encrypted comms that only a few insiders knew existed. Musk had vanished, and the companies were unraveling. Some employees cried. Others panicked. A few high-ranking officials quietly started selling shares. Claire kept refreshing the internal systems, hoping for a ping, a sign, anything. But deep down, she remembered something. A whisper in the hall months ago. Someone had mentioned it when they thought no one was listening. He disappears when it gets bad. Goes off the grid. Comes back with something no one else could have thought of. Claire had overheard that and tucked it away. Now, it echoed in her ears. But this time, things were worse than bad. This was catastrophic. Government liaisons started showing up. Claire watched as security escorted them to the top floors. Rumors flew like ash. Was he in legal trouble? Did he trigger some kind of protocol? The only thing that mattered to Claire was the sense, call it gut instinct, that he hadn't left to escape. He had left to solve. She remembered the look in his eyes the one time she'd passed him in the hallway. It was as if he was constantly watching something that hadn't happened yet, always a few years ahead of everyone else. Claire wasn't one for dramatics. She liked facts. But that look haunted her now. The servers began to lock up as access was restricted to top clearance only. Claire had no such clearance. But she did have backups. She'd been running simulations on a proposed AI satellite optimization protocol. It was niche. Boring. No one cared about it, except Elon, briefly. He had messaged her personally 2 weeks ago asking a single question: can this adapt mid-orbit without ground contact? She had replied yes, if it could process its own code evolution. He never answered. Now, with him gone, she accessed her private logs of the exchange. Her eyes scanned the metadata. One line blinked, unrecognized login attempt from external IP, Nevada. Claire blinked. Nevada? That didn't make sense. SpaceX didn't have any major ops there. Her fingers flew over the keyboard as she traced the IP. It was masked, but something in the code felt familiar. Elon had a style, a signature in his syntax. The way he nested logic, the way he used quotes. This wasn't just a random ping. It was a breadcrumb. She copied the line, pasted it into her private development environment, and began reverse tracing it. The seconds felt like hours. Finally, it gave her something, GPS coordinates. Claire's heart stopped. In the chaos of executives, collapsing systems, and media hysteria, she had something real. A dot on the map. She stared at it. It was in the middle of nowhere. A forgotten section of desert in southern Nevada. No official listings. No government tags. No satellite overlays. Just dirt, rocks, and maybe, something else. Her phone buzzed. It was her manager. Emergency, all hands. 10 minutes. We need everyone in the lower conference room. She looked at the GPS again. Every cell in her body told her to go to that meeting, to follow orders, to keep her job. But something stronger pulsed in her veins. A question. Not about where Elon was, but why he had left. She wasn't the kind of person to break rules. Her father had drilled discipline into her like concrete. No risks. No leaps. But her mother had been different. A dreamer. A scientist. Before she passed, she told Claire one thing that never left her: the future belongs to the ones who chase it, even when everyone else is running the other way. Claire made a decision. She grabbed her tablet, stuffed it into her backpack, and walked straight past the meeting room without looking back. She didn't know what she was walking into. She only knew that if Elon Musk was missing, and the world was breaking apart, she wasn't going to wait for someone else to solve it. She was going to Nevada. Claire Bennett didn't grow up dreaming about space. That came later. First came the noise, the shouting behind closed doors, her father's disappointment wrapped in silence, and the soft hum of her mother's voice trying to cover both with kindness. Her childhood home in Pittsburgh had always felt colder than the temperature outside. Her father, Harold Bennett, was a retired naval officer turned systems analyst. Order was everything to him. He believed in checklists, early mornings, pressed shirts, and the idea that discipline solved everything. Her mother, Julia, had been different. A research biologist who loved chaos in small, magical doses. She would wake Claire up at midnight just to see fireflies or sneak her into university labs to show her bacteria through a microscope. Life's complicated, sweetheart. But look at this cell. It's still trying, she would whisper, as if she were showing Claire a secret. When Julia died in a car crash during Claire's sophomore year of high school, everything changed. Harold became quieter, more rigid, and Claire buried herself in science to survive. She hated rules but followed them. She wanted freedom but clung to structure. By the time she entered MIT at 16, she had transformed herself into someone no one could ignore. Top of her class. Emotionless. Relentlessly driven. People admired her, but few got close. She didn't allow it. She didn't want anyone to see how deep the cracks ran. Her mother's loss was a hole she filled with code, equations, and 12-hour lab sessions. Space didn't enter the picture until a professor showed her a simulation of orbital decay during a lecture on astrophysics. She had never seen anything so elegant. Controlled chaos. Every object hurtling through the void, but still governed by invisible laws. That night, she stayed up until sunrise reading every paper on orbital mechanics she could find. That's when she first saw Elon Musk's name pop up, not in the headlines, but in a paper he co-authored on autonomous in-space repair systems. It was obscure. Technical. But her professor said something that stuck: this man doesn't ask if it's possible. He just builds until it is. Claire didn't admire easily. But that struck something in her. She'd followed his work ever since. Not the media frenzy or social media noise, but the actual science buried underneath. By the time she graduated, she had one goal: work at SpaceX. It took her 3 years, 2 rejections, and one final application video where she used machine learning to solve a previously unsolved satellite drift problem. She got a callback within 24 hours. Once inside, the reality didn't match the dream. SpaceX was fast, brilliant, and chaotic. There were people who had worked there for 10 years and still barely kept their heads above water. She kept her head down, did the work, and let others take credit if it kept her on the inside. Elon rarely appeared in person. Sometimes he'd float through the open workspaces like a ghost, eyes fixed on something distant, muttering numbers or suddenly asking questions that had no context but made everyone freeze. Claire had always been too junior to talk to him. Until 2 weeks ago. Her project, Adaptive Satellite AI Protocols, was buried in the system, something she worked on during spare hours. It wasn't assigned. It wasn't funded. It was just her obsession. She had submitted a test report to internal files, more out of habit than hope. When she got the message from DM late that night, she thought it was a prank. One line: "Can this adapt mid-orbit without ground contact?" She stared at it for a full minute before replying, "Yes. If it learns how to evolve its own command language." He never responded. But that was the moment she felt seen. Now, sitting on the dusty floor of a cheap motel just outside Las Vegas, Claire stared at the same message again, wondering what it had meant. She'd driven 6 hours from LA in a rented electric sedan under a fake name. She didn't know what she was looking for, only that the coordinates from the server logs pointed to a grid deep in the Mojave Desert, several miles off any official road. She was exhausted, running on vending machine coffee and instinct. Her father had left 3 voicemails. The last one was angry: "Claire, what are you doing? I know you're in Nevada. What the hell is going on? Call me back." She hadn't called him in months. Their last conversation had ended with her yelling, "Just because you followed orders your whole life doesn't mean I have to," and hanging up. He hadn't responded until now. Her mother would have understood. Claire stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the exact way her mother's eyes looked when she was about to explain something wonderful. That soft, conspiratorial glint. She missed her more now than ever. She opened her laptop and loaded the coordinates again. There was nothing on Google Maps. No roads. No signs. But the data showed a tiny anomaly: thermal distortion in satellite images, only visible in infrared. Something was generating heat where nothing should exist. A bunker? A lab? She wasn't sure. But she'd rented an off-road bike and planned to be there by dawn. Her palms were sweating. She wasn't used to breaking rules, and this was way beyond company policy. But something told her this was bigger than job titles or NDAs. She closed her laptop, slid it into her bag, and lay back on the scratchy motel bed. Sleep didn't come easy. Her mind replayed every headline she'd seen earlier: Elon Musk missing. Board members in panic, Tesla stock plunges 18%, government investigation underway, crypto markets tumble. But none of those headlines knew the man who asked about mid-orbit adaptation. None of them had seen the GPS ping, or recognized the code patterns. She had. That had to mean something. In the quiet, her mind wandered to the simulation she'd run last year, an experiment where a self-learning AI had managed to outmaneuver a software-controlled satellite tether system. It had made a choice Claire hadn't predicted. Not dangerous. Just unexpected. She'd shown it to a senior developer, who waved it off. Too unpredictable. "We need control, not curiosity." Claire disagreed. She'd kept developing it in secret. The AI was basic, primitive compared to Neuralink systems, but it had started doing something strange: rewriting its own command inputs in metaphors. Not code. Language. Like it was trying to think symbolically. Elon would have loved that. She knew it. As she drifted into restless sleep, one phrase kept spinning in her mind: step outside the system. What system? Corporate? Economic? Civilization? Herself? She woke up just after 4:30 a.m., showered quickly, packed her gear, and checked out. By 5:15, she was on the road again, bike loaded, GPS locked to the strange dot in the desert. The sun cracked the horizon in pale orange as she rode out onto the dirt path that quickly disappeared into nothing. Her heart thudded against her chest. Every mile felt like a test. And still, there was no turning back. Somewhere out there, Elon Musk was either hiding, solving, or preparing for something no one else could understand. And somehow, Claire knew she had to be the one to find him. The storm didn't start with fire or noise. It began with whispers, boardroom silences, and a tightening of every executive's voice at SpaceX, Tesla, Neuralink, and the Boring Company. The disappearance of Elon Musk wasn't just an emotional vacuum, it was a black hole pulling organizational gravity into collapse. Claire wasn't around to see the first waves hit, but she heard about them in fragments: phone calls to trusted friends inside the company, encrypted texts full of panic, one message reading only "leadership's gone full ghost mode. No one's steering this thing." In the hours following Elon's disappearance, a protocol triggered across all companies. Internal authority was supposed to shift temporarily to a senior circle of executives, codenamed Helix. The idea had been Elon's, years ago, a failsafe he quietly coded into the company's digital infrastructure. It was never intended to be used. But now it had activated, and chaos followed. At Tesla, Helix members couldn't agree on basic decisions. Engineers were pulled in three directions at once. One executive wanted to delay all releases, another pushed for doubling production to stabilize stock sentiment, and a third wanted to start a new round of public-facing campaigns to downplay the loss. Factories slowed, then halted. Orders were delayed. Key vendors stopped answering calls. At SpaceX, things were worse. Elon had personally directed all Starship development, and while blueprints existed, many of the most advanced systems were still in his head or in fragments across private terminals. Teams in Boca Chica and Hawthorne were paralyzed. Launches were postponed, and a manned mission planned for next month was abruptly cancelled, citing logistical constraints, though internally everyone knew it was because no one could understand the latest thrust vectoring data Musk had been iterating on by himself. Claire's phone buzzed with increasingly desperate messages from former colleagues. "Did you hear anything before you left? We can't find the test logs from April. Did you save a backup? People are freaking out. Someone said Elon might be dead but we don't believe it. You worked on his pet projects, right?" She didn't answer most of them. She couldn't. Not yet. She was still out in the Nevada desert, following coordinates that led her down dirt roads that vanished into cracked earth and cactus fields, all while the sky turned hotter and more colorless with each hour. Meanwhile, Neuralink suffered its own implosion. Several senior neuroscientists walked out after discovering that Musk had diverted a portion of AI processing resources to an encrypted program called Dawn, which nobody in the company had access to, not even the CTO. Some believed it was a side project. Others feared it was a kind of last-resort neural interface, something Elon was testing on himself. The internal Slack channels were filled with speculation. Dawn equals Deep Adaptive World Network. Dangerous Autonomous War Node. Claire's own theory felt both simpler and more terrifying. Dawn wasn't a backup, it was the plan. The one he couldn't trust anyone else with. While the internal infrastructures burned, the outside world didn't wait. Financial markets responded to Musk's absence like blood in the water. Tesla's stock dropped 24% in a single day before circuit breakers kicked in. Bitcoin and Dogecoin tanked as crypto investors assumed Elon's influence had vanished. Media outlets began swarming company buildings, drone footage flooded YouTube, reporters interviewed former interns and janitors just to get scraps of insight. Elon Musk was the nucleus of a system no one understood until it was gone. His absence wasn't just symbolic, it was systemic. He was the load-bearing beam in a house built entirely of innovation, momentum, and chaos. Without him, everything began to tilt. Claire finally reached the edge of the coordinates on the third morning, exhausted and sunburned, her bike nearly out of power. What lay ahead didn't look like a facility. It looked like a junkyard. A large mound of dirt, several half-buried shipping containers, and one rusting satellite dish pointing straight at the sky. But there was something beneath the dirt, metal. Smooth. Brushed aluminum. She pulled out her tablet, rechecked the GPS. She was dead on. Somewhere under this mound was a signal. She scanned the area. No visible doors. No signs. Just that eerie hum in the air, like static before a lightning strike. She was standing in the center of something Musk had hidden. Her tablet buzzed. A new message. Unknown sender. Do not try to open it from above. You must enter from the west. She spun around. No one in sight. She checked the IP, scrambled, routed through layers of anonymous servers. But the message included a map. Hand-drawn. Precise. That same signature logic, Elon style again. She followed the instructions, climbing a ridge to the west of the hill, finding a flat stretch of rock that didn't quite belong. She placed her palm on it, and it buzzed, lightly, mechanically. Seconds later, a hatch clicked open. She crawled inside. What she found was not a lab, not a bunker, not a workshop. It was all three. Clean metal floors, dark walls, humming consoles. Screens displayed code she didn't recognize, but the structure was familiar. Then she saw it, Iris. The same AI interface she'd once worked with at SpaceX before it had been quietly archived. "Hello, Claire," it said. Her breath caught in her throat. "You've been expected." She didn't speak. The system continued. "You were identified as one of 6 potential responders based on behavioral prediction algorithms initiated by EM. He's alive?" she asked. "Yes," Iris replied. "But not in a way the world is prepared for." Claire felt dizzy. "Where is he?" "That information is protected until behavioral markers are complete," Iris said. "You must first understand the scope of Project Dawn." Claire sat down hard on the floor, her thoughts spinning. Behind her, a wall screen lit up, displaying a diagram of Earth surrounded by orbital points. Drones. Satellites. Nodes. Project Dawn, Iris said, was never about colonizing Mars. It was about replacing Earth's operating system. Back in the world she'd left behind, protests were breaking out outside Tesla factories. Rumors of bankruptcy were flying. Federal agencies were demanding access to encrypted files. Some claimed Musk had fled to China. Others swore he was building a breakaway society on the moon. Claire now knew the truth was stranger than all of them. Elon Musk hadn't vanished. He had pulled himself out of the machine he built, because it was no longer fixable from the inside. The internal collapse was real. But it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something else. Something Claire had just stepped into. Claire sat in the dim light of the underground lab, the only sound the steady hum of processors and the low, melodic pulse of Iris's voice as it repeated, "Do you wish to continue?" Her mouth was dry, her heart pounding, but she nodded, whispering, "Yes," as if she were speaking to a ghost. The screen in front of her shifted. Lines of code filled the display, not just raw commands, but something more elegant, more layered. Embedded in the code were fragments of sentences, like Elon was trying to speak through the machine in riddles. "We cannot outvote the system," one line read. "We must out-evolve it." Another, "Control is illusion. Structure must be fluid. Institutions calcify, and we must liquefy. Claire didn't know what to make of it, but she couldn't look away. These weren't the cold, binary instructions typical of back-end AI management systems. They felt more like philosophy encoded in logic. Iris spoke again, "You are now accessing Protocol Polaris. Estimated time to comprehension, 19 hours. Claire leaned forward. Comprehension? Iris responded, "You must interpret the patterns. Only through understanding the underlying architecture of Dawn can you proceed to Phase 2. Claire's hands moved to the keyboard instinctively. She had spent her entire career analyzing code, and yet this felt different. She scrolled line by line, cross-referencing symbols, searching for familiar syntax. Most of it was foreign, but not alien. It bore Elon's fingerprints, his use of nested logic loops, his habit of coding reminders to himself in symbolic terms, like // build escape ladder, and // if plan fails, assume next move is necessary. Then she found it, a command line that read, begin. Nestedrealm.exe, she hesitated, then ran it. The display shifted again, now showing a three-dimensional network map of interconnected systems, satellite clusters, neural interface hubs, energy storage units, underground data vaults, off-grid communication relays. Claire blinked. It was like seeing the internet with its skin peeled off. This was Musk's shadow infrastructure. A parallel system quietly constructed alongside his public empire, hidden in plain sight. Dawn is not one project, Iris said. It is a convergence. Energy, communication, mobility, cognition. The components must sync to complete the transition. Claire whispered, transition to what? Iris paused, as if thinking. Phase 3, Autopoietic Civilization. The words made Claire's stomach clench. She knew the term, autopoiesis was the process by which systems regenerate and maintain themselves. Musk was building a world that could run independently of the systems that now ruled Earth. Not a Mars colony. Not a backup planet. A breakaway operating system for civilization itself. Claire stared at the map, tracing lines that connected Nevada to off-grid battery farms in Alaska, to high-altitude drone networks in the Andes, to undersea cables rerouted through the Arctic. Elon hadn't just disappeared, he had unplugged himself from everything else. Claire's brain was spinning. She looked back at the code, running simulations, testing inputs, watching how the system responded. It didn't act like normal AI. It evolved. When she changed parameters, it didn't recalculate, it rewrote the rules around her changes. Claire's fingers flew. She sent a message to Iris. What's the trigger condition for Dawn Phase 3? Iris paused, then replied, simultaneous failure of 3 major systems, governmental collapse, energy disruption, data fragmentation. Claire swallowed hard. What's the current risk status? The screen turned red. Systemic instability, 83%. Time to projected cascade, 9 days. Her hands trembled. That couldn't be possible. 9 days until the entire global operating framework risked collapse. Was that what Elon had seen? Was this what drove him underground? Then another line appeared, alternate trigger authorized by EM, override, emotional discontinuity index greater than 0.97. Claire froze. That was her field, emotional modeling. She'd worked on adaptive feedback loops for machine empathy early in her career. But this? This meant Elon had programmed Dawn to respond not just to system collapse, but to emotional thresholds. Human emotion. Specifically, his own. Iris, define emotional discontinuity index, she typed. A measure of existential despair as identified through biometric readings and language patterns in EM's personal interactions. She closed her eyes. Elon hadn't just built a system to survive the world. He had built it to activate if he no longer believed the world could survive him. This wasn't just strategy. It was a fail-safe built around heartbreak. Claire sat back, the weight of what she was reading crashing down. This wasn't about genius anymore. This was about loneliness. Isolation. A man so convinced of humanity's fragility that he'd planned an exit route not just from Earth, but from hope itself. She stood up, paced the narrow lab. The world outside was collapsing in slow motion, and inside this bunker, Elon Musk had written poetry into code, sadness into systems, desperation into infrastructure. Claire remembered how he'd looked in the hallway that one time she passed him, like a man drowning in future thoughts. Now she understood. Her tablet buzzed again. A new message from Iris: you must find the trigger vector. The system is incomplete without you. Claire stared at the screen. She didn't know what it meant, but she had a feeling that the next piece of the puzzle wasn't here in this lab. Elon had built Iris to direct someone, someday, to the truth. But only if they could decode him. Not just his intellect, but his heart. She left the console running and stepped back out into the desert light, the sun blazing across the empty landscape. She reached for her satellite phone and made the first call she'd made in 2 years, to Leo Zhang. They hadn't spoken since MIT. Not really. But he was the only one who could help now. He picked up after 4 rings, groggy, confused. Claire. It's been, what the hell? Are you okay? No, she said. But I think I found him. What? I need you to come to Nevada. I'll send coordinates. Bring everything you have on self-learning language protocols. And Leo? Yeah. Bring your Neuralink clearance, too. We're not just trying to find Elon. We're trying to finish what he started. The line was quiet for a beat, then he replied, I'm on my way. Claire hung up and stared at the sun again, her mind still locked on one last line from the code, repeating over and over in her memory, the future is not written. But the code is running anyway. Claire stood in the dry Nevada wind, the sun climbing higher behind her, the lab's hatch closed and sealed beneath the dust again, her satellite phone clutched in one hand, the desert stretching endlessly in every direction, and all she could think about was time, not the time of the clock, but the time left before the system cracked completely, before dawn activated on its own terms, before the world Elon had spent years trying to hold together finally slipped into chaos, and she was the only person, at least for now, who had seen the whole thing up close. She had been trained to think logically, to follow structure and data and evidence, but now that seemed almost useless, because the more she peeled back Elon's design, the more emotional it felt, not weak, not impulsive, but deeply personal, like every layer of dawn had been infused with fear, hope, exhaustion, even love, and it terrified her to think that a man who had once said he wanted to die on Mars might have built an entirely new world on Earth as a way to say goodbye. She tried to shake the thought. Leo was on his way. She had 4, maybe 5 hours until he arrived, and that meant she needed to use every second to figure out the next move, because right now, she didn't know where Elon physically was. Iris wouldn't give that up, and the system clearly required something from her, something it wouldn't or couldn't do alone. Then she ran a simulation comparing her empathy modeling with Elon's emotional coding embedded in Dawn. The results were low at first. But then she added her archived prototype, an experimental AI she had once built, codenamed Mira, which used symbolic language and metaphorical reasoning. Elon had once shown brief interest in it, before shelving the project. She integrated Mira's reasoning layer into the analysis. The match climbed to 82%. Then 87%. At 92%, the console pinged and flashed green, preliminary synchronization achieved. Proceed to node alignment. She clicked yes. Immediately, a new interface opened, an organic-looking flowchart of communication nodes, not data nodes, but meaning nodes, shaped like trees, questions branching into concepts, branching into emotions, branching into encoded memories. It wasn't a system to manage infrastructure. It was a conversation engine. A model of how Elon Musk understood human language and connection. The system waited. Speak, Iris prompted. Claire hesitated, then whispered, if you're watching this, if you're listening. I think I understand. You couldn't fix the world from inside it, so you stepped outside. You built something to replace it. But you weren't trying to escape. You were trying to leave a message for someone who could see the pattern. The screen shimmered. Another prompt appeared, define the message. Claire closed her eyes. That we're not doomed. That if we learn how to listen, really listen, we can rebuild without repeating our mistakes. That emotion isn't a flaw in the system, it's the key to making the system human again. The console vibrated slightly. Then a final command appeared, vector recognized. Uplink to Dawn core enabled. Confirm identity, Claire Bennett. She typed her name. A progress bar began to fill. At 100%, Iris spoke, communication pillar confirmed. Phase 3 override delayed. New stabilization time, 13 days. Claire exhaled so deeply it felt like a lifetime. She had bought the world a week. 1 week to find Elon. 1 week to convince him not to activate the full protocol. 1 week to finish the conversation he had started in code, in architecture, and in pain. Her tablet buzzed. A new message, routed through Dawn's relay. One line. Untraceable. Undeniable. You found it. Now come find me. She sat frozen, staring at the words, then slowly stood, walked back out into the burning light, and waited for Leo. She was no longer just a systems engineer, no longer just a rogue agent. She was now the bridge between the world that had failed, and the one that still might be saved. The rental SUV kicked up a thin cloud of desert dust as it came barreling down the barely visible road, the heat shimmer twisting the vehicle into a mirage until it pulled to a stop 10 feet from where Claire stood, shielding her eyes from the sun. The driver door opened, and Liu Zhang stepped out, taller than she remembered, hair longer, and face thinner, like the last 2 years had worn him down in the same way it had worn the world. He looked at her with a mix of disbelief and urgency, a heavy duffel slung over his shoulder, and said, "You look like hell." Claire gave a half-smile. "Thanks. You're late." He glanced at the low hills behind her. "This the place?" She nodded. He built something under there. A lab. An AI. Something more. I'll show you. They descended into the underground bunker again, the cool metal walls swallowing them in a hush that made it feel like they'd stepped out of reality. Leo whistled low as he saw the consoles. This is what he was hiding. Claire shook her head. No. This is just the interface. The real system is out there. This just connects to it. She quickly explained Dawn, the cascade risk, the emotional threshold, and the idea that Elon had created not just a plan, but a test, one that required understanding, not just intelligence. Leo listened in silence, then slowly unpacked a flat terminal from his bag. I brought Mira's last compiled library. And I grabbed a bypass key from the Neuralink development tree before I left. I figured if this involved cognition modeling, we'd need it. Claire nodded. We've stabilized the system for now. I bought us time. But not much. Less than 2 weeks before everything tips over. He stared at the large display wall as Iris lit up again, now displaying Dawn's communication trees. He was trying to rewrite reality, Leo said. Not just through tech. Through meaning. Exactly, Claire said. And now he's given us a clue. I got a message. It came through the Dawn relay. 1 sentence. You found it. Now come find me. Leo's brow furrowed. Any metadata? Claire shook her head. Scrubbed clean. But there was a hidden vector in the data structure. A timestamp that didn't match server time. I think it's GPS time. Leo's eyes lit up. Then it's a location tag. Not a clock. They opened the message and ran a trace on the metadata. After half an hour of decoding offsets and aligning clock signals, a point appeared on their map, central Colorado, deep inside the Rockies. Claire's stomach twisted. That's NORAD territory. Old Cold War installations. Off-grid. Abandoned, mostly. Leo leaned closer. Unless someone repurposed them. The two of them stared at the map, knowing instinctively this was it. This was where Elon had gone. Claire packed up what she needed and helped Leo secure the rest of the data backups. Before they left, she issued one last command to Iris: if the cascade threshold hits 0.98, initiate containment. Iris replied, understood. Autonomous containment only possible if vector remains linked. She hesitated. Define linked. Iris answered, you must stay alive. Claire felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't just about understanding. It was about endurance. If she failed, not only would Dawn activate, it might do so without control. Without her. She and Leo drove north in silence for hours, across barren stretches of desert and into the green foothills of Colorado, the air cooling as elevation climbed, the roads narrowing and traffic disappearing until only the sound of the engine and their shared breath filled the cabin. Leo finally broke the silence. You ever think he just snapped? Claire looked at him. Elon. Yeah. I mean, everything you're saying, it sounds less like planning and more like obsession. Paranoia. Claire tightened her grip on the steering wheel. Or maybe he saw it clearer than anyone else. Still, Leo said, if he wanted help, why not just ask? She pulled over, switched off the engine, and turned to him. Because every time he asked, the world turned it into a headline. Every time he reached out, people either worshipped or attacked. He needed someone who wouldn't do either. Just someone who would listen. Leo looked away, quiet. Then nodded. Okay. Let's find him. They continued deeper into the mountains, following logging roads and decommissioned military trails, until the GPS led them to a narrow dirt pass that ended in a dead zone, no cell signal, no satellite ping, just forest and stone and a thick silence that felt ancient. At the edge of a cliff, half concealed by moss and thyme, was a steel door embedded in the rock. No lock. No handle. Just a panel with a biometric scanner that blinked once as they approached. Claire stepped forward. Claire Bennett, she said aloud. The scanner pulsed, then the door opened inward with a hiss of pressurized air. Inside was darkness and the scent of metal and dust. They entered slowly, lights flickering on as they moved deeper, the hallway curving downward like a spiral into the earth. At the end was a single room, round and simple, with one chair, one console, and one man sitting in the shadows. Elon Musk. He looked up as they entered. His beard was longer, eyes heavier, but unmistakably him. He didn't move. Just watched them, as if trying to decide whether to speak. Claire's throat tightened. You're alive. Elon nodded slowly. You passed the first test. Leo stayed back, letting Claire step forward. You left everything, she said. Everyone. Why? Elon's voice was quiet, steady. Because I couldn't stop the collapse. Not from inside. I built Dawn as a last resort. And I left to see if anyone could find the signal through the noise. Claire shook her head. You could have asked. You didn't have to disappear. Elon stood now, slowly, his presence still magnetic, still sharp. No. I did. Because the signal I needed wasn't just technical. It had to be emotional. Philosophical. Dawn isn't just a system reboot. It's a moral filter. It will rebuild the world in the image of the people who understand it. And that had to be someone who saw the world for what it was, and still chose to stay in it. Claire stared at him. And if I hadn't? Elon didn't answer Claire's question right away. He stepped toward the console in the center of the circular room, brushed a layer of dust off the glass surface, and tapped twice. The lights dimmed, and a projection formed in the air above the table, an expanding 3D map of Earth overlaid with pulsing red zones that flickered like veins across the continents, each one shifting, growing, fluctuating in response to unseen variables. "If you hadn't come," he said at last, his voice low and tired but clear, "then Dawn would have executed Phase 3 on its own terms, without human comprehension. It would have taken control of the energy grid, the comm networks, and every automated decision-making system embedded in major infrastructure across 4 continents. But it wouldn't have known why. It would have just acted. It's like giving an amnesiac a weapon and hoping they point it in the right direction." Claire stared at the map. "And now?" "Now," Elon said, "we have a chance to guide it instead of surrendering to it." "But the window's closing." Leo stepped into the room fully, arms crossed, his eyes locked on the projection. "These red zones, are those real-world destabilization points?" Elon nodded. "Economic unrest, social disintegration, ecological thresholds. Each one's a fracture line. The more they pulse, the closer we get to global systemic failure." Claire took a breath. "You built Dawn to override that. But it's not just automation. It's a story. One the world has to believe in, not just be subjected to." Elon turned to her, his eyes sharp now. "Exactly. That's what people don't understand. Systems fail not because of hardware, but because of narrative collapse. People stop believing in the structure, and that belief is what holds civilization together. I couldn't fix that from a boardroom. So I built a system that waits, for belief. For understanding. For someone who could interpret it, not just operate it." Leo looked between them. "So what happens next? You come back. Release a public statement. Reset the whole thing." Elon walked to a terminal embedded in the wall. "No. I stay hidden. At least until the architecture is stable. If I surface too soon, I become the distraction again. It has to be someone else who activates Phase 4. Claire froze. "Phase 4? I thought Phase 3 was the final step." Elon looked back at her, his expression unreadable. 3 is stabilization. 4 is ignition. The actual transfer of influence from old systems to new ones. That requires full comprehension of Dawn's core logic by at least 2 independent vectors. You're one. We need another. Who? Claire asked. That's what we're here to find, Elon replied. Dawn is scanning behavior patterns across the net, forums, academic submissions, obscure blog posts, encrypted message boards. It's searching for someone else who has sensed the fracture and is reaching for something beyond the current system. Leo stepped closer to the projection. And if it doesn't find that second vector? Elon didn't blink. Then Dawn reverts to autonomous control. Cold logic. No empathy layer. Which means we rebuild society without compassion. Efficiency without meaning. Order without memory. It'll work. But it'll be dead. Claire's pulse pounded. We can't let that happen. Elon's expression darkened. We're already close. The emotional discontinuity index one hardwired into the system, it wasn't just for me. It was a last gauge of human willpower. The signal you triggered extended the deadline, but the global feedback is still dropping. People are giving up. He touched a section of the map and zoomed in on a city, Berlin, pulsing red and purple. This is what collapse looks like now. Not bombs. Not riots. Just quiet disintegration. No belief. No future. Claire stepped beside him, thinking fast. Then we need to flip the signal. Not just delay the cascade. We need to inspire a counterwave. Something that spreads belief again. Leo gave a skeptical look. You mean like propaganda? No, Claire said. A new message. Not a command, not a threat. A story. Something people recognize as real, as coming from somewhere human. Elon gave a slow nod. That's why you're here. Not just to find me. To carry it. Claire stared at him. You want me to become the face of dawn? Not the face, Elon said. The heart. Silence fell between them. Then Leo stepped forward. We still need to stabilize the cognition pillar. You said earlier it wasn't complete. Elon nodded. It requires a direct neural link interface. Mine's decaying, partly by design. It can't complete the ignition path. But we have a proxy. He looked at Leo. Your clearance key. Combined with Claire's confirmed vector, we can run the mirror protocol. That should unlock the final gateway. Leo hesitated. And if it doesn't? Then the system will default to full automation at the next threshold breach. Leo took out the Neuralink drive, connected it to the console. The room dimmed again. Dawn's full architecture unfolded around them, lines of connection spanning every continent, every major system, every relay point Musk had secretly embedded over years of parallel development. The ignition key floated in the center like a beating heart. Claire stepped forward. Her voice was calm, but her limbs trembled. Let me do it. Elon met her gaze. You sure? I didn't come this far to stop halfway. She placed her hand on the console. It pulsed warm, then cool. A line of light extended to her forehead. She felt a jolt, not pain, more like a deep breath being taken inside her skull. Then images. Memories. Elon as a child. First rocket. PayPal sale. First tweet. The Falcon Heavy launch. His divorce. The sleepless nights. His mother's voice. The loneliness. And the hope. Always the hope. The dream of something better. Something enduring. Claire gasped. The interface released. Iris spoke, synchronization complete. Final vector recognized. The map above them changed. The red zones flickered, but some began to pulse gold at the edges. Dawn was responding. Beginning to heal. A new pathway lit up across the network, one that hadn't existed before. A loop from Claire's node to a node in Kenya. Leo leaned forward. That's the second one. A match. Elon turned to Claire, wonder in his eyes. You found the next signal. Claire looked at the data. Names Wanjiru Mbatha. 24. Kenyan data theorist. She wrote a blog post last week about post-trust societal frameworks. It barely got 10 clicks. Elon smiled faintly. But Dawn found her. Leo exhaled slowly. What now? Claire turned to them both. Now we go to her. We explain everything. We connect. We finish this the right way. Elon nodded, and for the first time, there was no weight in his shoulders. Just readiness. Outside, the wind stirred the trees along the ridge. The fracture was real. But so was the possibility of healing it. Claire and Leo landed in Nairobi just before dawn, the city still draped in a quiet haze that softened the jagged edges of buildings and the relentless buzz of life already stirring beneath. The air was thick with humidity and the scent of earth and exhaust fumes blending into a uniquely Kenyan perfume. Claire's mind raced as she stared out the airplane window, knowing that somewhere beneath this sprawling metropolis was Wanjiru Mbatha, the elusive data theorist Dawn had marked as the next vector. Finding her would be like chasing a ghost through a labyrinth of humanity and code. They disembarked swiftly, moving through the busy Jomo Kenyatta International Airport with practiced urgency, faces partially obscured by sunglasses and hats. Leo checked the encrypted messages on his phone, watching the stream of coordinates, social data, and encrypted chatter that Iris parsed relentlessly, all pointing to a cluster of neighborhoods in the Kibra slums, one of Africa's largest informal settlements. "This is where she lives," Leo said quietly. Claire nodded. "We can't just walk in. It's not safe." They hired a local guide, a woman named Amina, who knew the maze of alleyways and backstreets like the back of her hand. As they moved into the narrow paths lined with corrugated metal shacks and vibrant murals, Claire felt the weight of the community around her, children playing in dust, women hauling water, men repairing scraps of machinery, and the hum of radios playing distant music. It was alive and raw and unfiltered, a contrast to the sanitized tech bubbles they were used to. Amina led them to a small, modest compound tucked away from the main paths. "Wanjiru's home," Amina said softly. Claire felt a nervous flutter as she knocked. The door opened a crack, revealing a young woman with keen, alert eyes and a hesitant smile. Wanjiru Mbatha was thinner than Claire expected, her dark hair tied back tightly, her clothes simple but functional. She looked them over quickly, curiosity flickering across her face. "You're Claire Bennett?" Wanjiru asked. Claire nodded. "Yes. We need to talk. About Dawn. About the world." Wanjiru hesitated, then stepped aside. "Come in." The room inside was small but orderly. Books and papers were stacked carefully on shelves and tables, interspersed with cables and gadgets that looked homemade but clever. Claire took a seat while Leo stayed standing by the doorway, watching. Wanjiru sat across from Claire, hands folded in her lap. "I don't understand why you're here. My blog is just a handful of posts. No one reads it." Claire smiled faintly. "Dawn reads everything. And it found you because it's looking for hope, someone who understands that trust isn't dead, just fractured. Someone who can help build a new narrative." Wanjiru's eyes narrowed. "You mean a system reboot? Like what Musk was planning?" Claire nodded. "Exactly. But it's not just a tech fix. It's about people believing in something again. Dawn can't do it alone." Wanjiru leaned forward. "And you want me to be that someone?" Claire looked her in the eye. "Yes. But not alone. You and me. And others we find along the way. We have to connect the vectors, people who can keep the system human." Wanjiru seemed to consider this, then shook her head. "Why me? I'm just a data analyst." A voice lost in the noise. Claire's voice softened. "Because sometimes the smallest signals change everything. And because Dawn chose you." Wanjiru's fingers trembled slightly as she pulled out a small device, a homemade terminal patched together with wires and a cracked screen. "This is what I've been working on. A decentralized trust network, based on shared stories and verified experiences. It's slow, messy, but real." Claire reached out and touched the device gently. "Exactly what we need. A way to rebuild faith in the system from the ground up." Leo stepped forward. "We have resources. Connections. But we need your insight." Wanjiru hesitated again, then nodded slowly. "Okay. But this has to be real. No manipulation. No hidden agendas." Claire smiled. "That's why we're here." Over the next several days, Claire, Leo, and Wanjiru worked intensely in the cramped compound, mapping Dawn's data streams, analyzing social feedback loops, and crafting the first drafts of a new framework that combined AI analytics with human narrative. Wanjiru's vision of a grassroots trust network began to take shape, a digital ecosystem where stories of resilience, community, and honesty were rewarded and amplified, creating a ripple effect that could counter the despair spreading worldwide. But even as they worked, the signs of fracture became impossible to ignore. Nairobi itself was a city on edge. Frequent power outages, protests over inequality, rumors of government crackdowns. One evening, as they sat around a small fire, Amina's face was grim. "There are people watching. Not just the police. Others. They don't want this change. Claire's pulse quickened. Who? Amina shook her head. I don't know. But it's why you must be careful. The forces keeping the old world in place are stronger than you think. Wanjiru looked at Claire. Is this what Elon meant? That the system will fight back? Claire nodded. Yes. The fracture line isn't just in society. It's in power. In control. If we want to heal, we have to break through. The next morning, as they prepared to leave Nairobi for the next vector, Claire received a message on a secure channel, a warning embedded in encrypted code that only Iris could decrypt. They know you're here. Move fast. They packed quickly and slipped through the city's backstreets, hearts pounding with the knowledge that the hunt was no longer just about finding the signal but surviving the forces determined to stop it. As they boarded the plane heading east, Claire looked out over the endless landscape below and felt the weight of the journey ahead. This was more than a mission. It was a battle for the soul of a fractured world. Somewhere out there, others were waiting to join the signal. And time was running out. The flight from Nairobi to Johannesburg was tense, the cabin dim and silent except for the low hum of engines and the occasional clatter of cups from the flight attendants. Claire sat beside Leo, both of them staring out the window at the vast expanse of savannah below, their minds tangled in the weight of the mission. Wanjiru had slipped into a quiet focus, her fingers dancing on her homemade terminal, monitoring Dawn's shifting pulses and the growing resistance signals scattered across the globe. The network's expanding, she murmured. More people are responding. But so is the pushback. Claire nodded slowly. The forces trying to maintain control, they're organized, aren't they? Leo leaned forward. More than we thought. It's not just governments or corporations. There are private security firms, rogue elements inside intelligence agencies, even tech syndicates who profit from chaos. Claire's eyes narrowed. They want the fracture to deepen. They feed off the uncertainty. Wanjiru's fingers stopped typing for a moment. And they're hunting us now. The warning from Nairobi wasn't the first. Signals intercepted near Lagos, Mumbai, even Buenos Aires suggest coordinated attempts to disrupt our connections. Claire swallowed hard. We need allies. Real ones. Not just the vectors Dawn identifies. Leo smiled grimly. That's where Johannesburg comes in. After landing, they slipped into the city's bustling streets with the help of local contacts. Johannesburg was a place of contrasts, gleaming skyscrapers shadowing sprawling townships, tech hubs nestled beside informal markets, and a restless energy pulsing through every corner. Here, the team hoped to find a hidden network of activists, hackers, and thinkers who had been quietly pushing against the old world's grip for years, a collective known only as the Pulse. Claire, Wanjiru, and Leo were led to an unmarked building in a neglected district. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of soldering irons, coffee, and something indefinably electric. Walls were covered in whiteboards scribbled with code and slogans, makeshift servers hummed in the corners, and dozens of people moved with purpose and urgency. The Pulse's leader, a woman named Tandy, greeted them with a firm handshake and sharp eyes. We've heard of your arrival, she said. And of Dawn's strange stirrings. Claire explained the situation, carefully outlining Dawn's purpose and the need to connect the vectors to stabilize the global narrative. Tandy listened intently, then nodded. We've been waiting for something like this, a way to turn the scattered whispers into a roaring chorus. But it's dangerous. The fracture line is deeper than ever. The old systems fight harder when they feel threatened. Over the next few days, the Pulse shared intelligence and resources. Using their underground communication networks, they mapped areas where Dawn's influence was rising, and identified hotspots of unrest that could either trigger collapse or catalyze recovery. Claire marveled at the depth of their work. Hidden satellite uplinks, encrypted mesh networks, and human couriers moving information like lifeblood through the veins of cities and settlements across Africa. But despite their optimism, cracks appeared. Tandy confided that the pulse itself was not immune to fractures, ideological splits, mistrust, and the constant fear of infiltration gnawed at their cohesion. Claire understood. This was the very challenge Elon had spoken of. Belief and trust were fragile, even among those who shared a common goal. One night, while working late in a cluttered room filled with monitors and cables, Claire received an urgent encrypted message from Wanjiru. "Something's wrong. A data breach. Someone accessed our project files." Claire's heart pounded. "Can we trace it?" Wanjiru shook her head. "They masked the entry point. Too skilled." Leo frowned. "They're closer than we thought." The breach wasn't just an attack on their systems. It was a psychological blow, meant to shake their confidence and sow suspicion. Tandy convened an emergency meeting. "We need to find the mole," she said, eyes scanning the room. This kind of betrayal could destroy everything. Claire felt the tension tighten like a noose. "Or we use it as a test. If our network can survive this, it'll be stronger." Tandy nodded slowly. "Then we tighten our security and strengthen our connections. Trust must be earned, not assumed." Over the next days, the team implemented rigorous protocols, secure channels, biometric authentication, decentralized data storage, and held open forums to rebuild trust among members. The fractures were still there, but the process began to knit them together with cautious threads of belief. Meanwhile, Dawn's signals pulsed stronger. The maps showed gold-edged zones expanding, symbols of hope flickering amidst the red. Claire worked with Wanjiru and Leo to refine the decentralized trust network, feeding it live data from the Pulse's encrypted communications, weaving a tapestry of stories and experiences that could counter the growing despair. In late evening, as the city lights glittered through the windows like scattered stars, Claire felt a moment of clarity. This is what Elon meant by the heart of Dawn. It's not just code or algorithms. It's people. Their stories, their struggles, their resilience. Leo smiled. "And it's fragile. But powerful." Wanjiru nodded. "We're creating a living system that grows with every connection." But then, as they prepared to broadcast a test signal designed to amplify their message of trust and renewal, disaster struck. An explosion rocked the building. Alarms blared. Shattered glass and dust filled the air. Claire was thrown to the floor. Leo shouted for everyone to evacuate. Outside, chaos erupted as a second blast hit the street below. The attackers were not just after data, they wanted to crush the very idea of connection. Emergency responders swarmed the area, but the Pulse's headquarters was devastated. Claire's heart raced as she searched through the smoke for Wanjiru and Tandy. Both emerged, shaken but alive. "They want us to break," Wanjiru said, voice trembling. "But we won't." Tandy's eyes burned with defiance. "This is just the beginning. We'll rebuild. Stronger. Smarter. More connected." As the dust settled, Claire realized the truth of what they faced. The fracture line was not just a technical challenge, it was a battle of wills, a war for the soul of civilization itself. The mission had grown beyond Elon, beyond Dawn, beyond any one person. It was now a global movement, fragile and dangerous, but filled with the spark of hope. With grim determination, Claire vowed to carry the signal forward. The hidden network might be battered, but it was alive. And so was the possibility of healing. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The blast in Johannesburg had been a brutal reminder that the fractures ran deep and the opposition was ruthless, but it also ignited a fierce determination in Claire and her team. As the smoke settled over the ruins of the Pulse's headquarters, a new plan was already forming, one that would not only rebuild what was lost but transform their entire approach. Claire stood amidst the wreckage, the acrid smell of burnt metal and dust filling her lungs. Around her, the remnants of servers, shattered screens, and broken cables lay scattered like fallen soldiers. Yet, beneath the destruction, a quiet resilience throbbed, a pulse refusing to die. "We can't keep hiding," Claire said to Wanjiru and Leo, their faces smeared with grime but eyes bright with resolve. "The fractures are everywhere, but so is the potential. It's time to go bigger, bolder." Wanjiru nodded, her fingers already dancing over her patched terminal, bringing up fragmented data streams and fragmented communications from scattered contacts around the globe. The decentralized trust network survived the attack. "That's a sign. The system is stronger than the walls." Leo paced the cramped space, the gravity of their mission settling over him like a storm. "We need a new framework, something that doesn't just survive attacks but anticipates them. Something that can evolve faster than those who want to crush us." Claire's gaze sharpened. "Exactly. And that means going beyond just connecting people. We need to create a self-healing ecosystem, a network that can regenerate itself, no matter what." That night, they sketched the first outlines of what would become known as the Phoenix Protocol, a revolutionary approach designed to make their movement not just resilient, but unstoppable. The idea was simple yet profound: build a digital organism that could learn, adapt, and grow from every attack, every betrayal, every failure. Unlike traditional networks, which relied on fixed nodes and centralized control, the Phoenix Protocol would be a living entity, distributed, autonomous, and fueled by the stories and trust of individuals worldwide. Claire felt a thrill unlike anything she had experienced before. This was more than technology. It was hope forged into code. Over the next weeks, their work accelerated. The Phoenix Protocol's architecture took shape through endless lines of code, encrypted algorithms, and relentless testing. Wanjiru's trust network served as the nervous system, sensing shifts in sentiment and social fabric. Leo's experience in cyber defense helped design adaptive security layers that could detect and isolate threats in real time. And Claire's vision ensured that the heart of the system remained human, centered on shared stories, empathy, and transparency. They reached out to their vectors, now scattered but more determined than ever. From Nairobi to New York, Sao Paulo to Seoul, the response was overwhelming. Individuals, communities, and organizations plugged into the protocol, their voices weaving a global narrative of resilience and renewal. But as the network grew, so did the threats. Shadowy entities launched cyber attacks designed to cripple their communications, spread misinformation, and erode trust. False narratives tried to fracture their unity. Government agencies issued warnings against unauthorized digital gatherings. Claire knew the fracture line was not just a physical or technical barrier, it was psychological warfare, aiming to isolate people from one another and sow doubt. Yet, the Phoenix Protocol was proving its strength. When a node was attacked or compromised, it was quickly quarantined and regenerated elsewhere. Trust scores recalibrated based on real interactions and verifiable actions, making it difficult for infiltrators to gain influence. The decentralized nature meant there was no single point of failure, no Elon to vanish and leave a void. Instead, the system thrived on the collective will and courage of its participants. One evening, Claire sat in the rebuilt command center. A far cry from the burnt-out shell it once was, watching a live feed of global connections pulsing across screens like veins of light. She thought about Elon Musk and the cryptic pattern of his disappearances, how every time he vanished under stress, he returned with a strategy no one could anticipate. Now, they were learning to do the same, not just relying on a single mind but becoming a collective force, capable of transformation and reinvention. As the sun set behind the cityscape, casting long shadows over the skyline, Claire received an encrypted message from an unknown source. The message was brief but chilling: "You're not the only phoenix rising." For a moment, she felt a cold thrill run down her spine. Whoever had sent that knew about the Phoenix Protocol and perhaps was planning their own rebirth, one that might not share the same ideals. The fractures were deeper and more complex than ever. The war for the future was no longer just about survival. It was about defining what that future would look like. Claire took a deep breath and replied, "Then let's see which phoenix burns brighter." The next morning, she gathered the core team. "We have to prepare for everything," she said. "Our network is alive, but we need to be ready for new challenges, internal and external." Wanjiru added, "That means not just technology but culture. We need rituals, symbols, and shared experiences that bind people emotionally to this movement." Leo chimed in, "And we need allies in places we've never considered before, artists, storytellers, educators. This has to be a revolution of hearts as well as minds." Claire smiled. "Then let's make sure that when the world fractures, it fractures open, revealing new paths instead of broken ruins." As the weeks passed, the Phoenix Protocol evolved beyond its initial design. It became a global tapestry of trust, weaving together disparate threads of humanity into a coherent and vibrant whole. From virtual forums filled with heartfelt stories of loss and hope to encrypted community networks coordinating grassroots projects, the movement grew organically and unstoppable. And yet, Claire knew the fractures would never fully disappear. The old world still clawed at the edges, desperate to maintain its grip. But in that struggle, something extraordinary was unfolding, a new era where connection, empathy, and shared purpose could outlast fear, isolation, and despair. Standing on the balcony of their new command center, watching the city lights flicker like stars, Claire felt a profound sense of peace mingled with fierce resolve. The journey was far from over, but the signal was clear: everything had just changed. The future belonged to those who dared to rise from the ashes, again and again. And the Phoenix Protocol was their anthem. The success of the Phoenix Protocol had brought a new wave of momentum to Claire and her team, but with it came an equally ominous shadow. The encrypted message Claire had received warning that they were not the only Phoenix rising was more than just a cryptic threat. It was a sign that the fractured world was spawning new, unpredictable forces, some aligned with their vision, others bent on control and destruction. Claire had learned to trust her instincts, and they screamed that the coming months would test everything they had built. The command center buzzed with activity as Wanjiru analyzed incoming data streams while Leo coordinated cyber defenses against increasing waves of hostile attacks. Messages from vectors scattered worldwide showed both hope and desperation. Communities united by the Phoenix Protocol but under siege by misinformation campaigns, sabotage, and political crackdowns. In the quiet moments between bursts of activity, Claire found herself haunted by the mystery behind the new adversary. Who were they? What was their true goal? Were they remnants of the old power structures, or something darker? One evening, as the city lights dimmed under a sudden blackout, Claire received a secure video call from Tandy, the Pulse leader who had barely survived the Johannesburg bombing. "We found something," Tandy said grimly. "There's a faction within the old intelligence networks. They've been gathering like a shadow government, pulling strings from the darkness." Claire leaned forward. "What kind of faction?" Tandy's eyes flickered with exhaustion and resolve. "They call themselves the Whisper Network. They believe chaos is the only path to control. They want to fracture society so deeply that people have no choice but to surrender power completely." The word sent a chill through Claire's spine. This was no longer a simple battle of ideas or technology, it was a war of survival against an enemy that thrived on fear and division. "How do we fight an enemy that hides in shadows?" Claire asked. "By shining light," Tandy replied. "We expose their operations, disrupt their communications, and build our own networks of truth and trust. But it's dangerous. They're ruthless." Back in the command center, Claire gathered the team. "We're facing a hidden war," she said. "The Whisper Network is trying to break the world's spirit. We have to fight back smarter and faster." Wanjiru added, "Our decentralized trust network can help us. We'll amplify verified stories of resistance, highlight acts of courage, and create digital safe havens for truth." Leo warned, "But they'll hit us where it hurts: infiltration, propaganda, even attempts to turn our own people against us." The tension was palpable, but so was the resolve. The fractures within society were reflected within their own ranks, with suspicion creeping into once solid alliances. Claire knew the delicate balance between vigilance and paranoia could make or break them. As days turned to weeks, the Phoenix Protocol became a battlefield of whispers and shadows. In encrypted forums, anonymous voices warned of spies and double agents. Social media was flooded with false narratives designed to confuse and demoralize. Entire communities faced digital blackouts as governments enacted emergency shutdowns. Yet, amid the turmoil, glimmers of hope emerged. Stories of everyday heroes. Teachers risking everything to keep education alive, doctors treating patients in makeshift clinics, neighbors organizing food deliveries, were shared and amplified by the network. The human stories behind the data points rekindled belief in connection and solidarity. One night, Claire received a message from an unknown sender containing a fragment of intercepted Whisper network communications. It revealed planned sabotage against a key Phoenix node in Berlin. With no time to lose, Claire coordinated a rapid response. Leo mobilized cybersecurity defenses while Wanjiru worked with local vectors to physically secure the site. Claire herself reached out to community leaders to rally support and create diversions to draw attention away from the attack. The operation was a tense ballet of coordination, trust, and courage. When the dust settled, the attack had been thwarted, but the cost was high. A trusted ally was revealed to be compromised, forcing painful decisions about loyalty and trust. Claire felt the sting of betrayal deeply. Yet, she understood it was part of the journey, a reminder that fractures were not just external but internal, and healing required both courage and forgiveness. In the weeks that followed, Claire found herself reflecting on Elon Musk's strange pattern of disappearance during moments of intense pressure, returning with clarity and unexpected strategies. Perhaps that was the lesson here, not to rely on a single savior but to embrace the collective wisdom and resilience of many. With renewed determination, Claire began working on a new phase of the Phoenix Protocol, one that incorporated lessons from betrayal and shadow wars. They developed more sophisticated algorithms to detect anomalies, built deeper layers of community verification, and crafted narrative tools to counter misinformation with compelling, truthful stories. The network began to pulse with a new energy, less fragile, more nuanced, and profoundly human. Still, the Whisper network lurked in the background, their presence a constant reminder that the fracture line was never static. It shifted and evolved, mirroring the complexities of human nature and society. Claire often wondered how many others were out there, hidden factions, idealists, cynics, all caught in the same struggle to shape a future worthy of hope. One evening, as she stared out over the city skyline, Claire whispered to herself, "We are the light in the shadows. We are the signal in the noise. And we will rise again." The battle was far from over, but the cracks were beginning to show, cracks not of destruction, but of possibility. Everything had changed, yet the story was only just beginning. The weeks following the thwarted Berlin attack were a tense, fragile time for Claire and the Phoenix Protocol team. Every connection felt precarious, every signal a whisper that might vanish without warning. The Whisper network's presence had grown more brazen, their disruption spreading like a dark tide across communication channels, governments, and even the hearts of those in the movement. Claire could sense the edges of silence creeping in, the moments when voices stopped, messages ceased, and hope flickered like a dying flame. Yet she refused to let the silence consume them. In the newly fortified command center, the hum of servers and screens was a comforting pulse against the creeping quiet. Wanjiru and Leo worked relentlessly to analyze patterns in the Whisper network's tactics, searching for cracks they could exploit. Claire spent hours reaching out to global vectors, encouraging them to keep telling their stories, to keep connecting, to resist the pressure to retreat into isolation. One evening, after a long day of meetings and strategizing, Claire received an unexpected message. It was from an old contact in the Pacific Northwest, a former journalist named Sam who had been tracking mysterious disappearances linked to digital activism. "I found something," Sam wrote. "A place where the silence began. A node of the Whisper network deep in the forests of Oregon." Claire's heart quickened. If they could pinpoint a physical base for the shadows, perhaps they could strike back, break the cycle of fear and suppression. Coordinating with Leo and Wanjiru, Claire arranged a small, covert team to investigate. Traveling under the cover of darkness, they made their way to Oregon, the dense forests and misty hills surrounding them like a living veil. The deeper they went, the more Claire felt the weight of silence pressing in, no cell phone signals, no internet, no signs of life except the rustling of leaves and distant calls of owls. Finally, they found it, an abandoned communications facility, half buried under moss and creeping vines, its antennae broken and silent. Inside, the air was thick with dust and a strange stillness. Computers sat dark, screens cracked. But traces of recent activity remained, encrypted drives, hastily scrawled notes, and the faint hum of a nearby server hidden beneath the floorboards. Wanjiru's fingers flew over her portable decryptor. They've been here recently. Setting traps. Suddenly, the room's lights flickered. A hidden alarm triggered, and a deep mechanical growl echoed as automated defenses activated, walls sliding, vents releasing gas, and a blaring siren drowning out all other sounds. Claire's heart pounded as the team scrambled for the exits, coughing and struggling through the thickening air. Outside, they regrouped, shaken but alive. The Whisper network had tried to trap them, and failed. The encounter was a stark reminder, the fractures were no longer just ideological or digital, but physical threats lurking in shadowy spaces. Back at the command center, Claire pored over the data retrieved from the Oregon node. It revealed a disturbing network of sleeper cells scattered across continents, ready to strike at moments of weakness. The Whisper network was evolving, spreading its tendrils like a virus. Yet, within the darkness, Claire found a strange glimmer, a clue hidden deep in the encrypted files, a set of coordinates leading to a place called the Edge of Silence. Intrigued and cautious, she decided to investigate further, knowing the risks but driven by the need to confront the fracture head-on. As she prepared for the journey, Claire reflected on the meaning of silence, not just the absence of sound but the absence of connection, the void where trust and hope could wither. The Edge of Silence was more than a location, it was a symbol of what they were fighting against. The next days saw Claire traveling alone, a departure from the usual team approach but necessary to move quietly. The coordinates led her to a remote settlement in northern Canada, surrounded by snow-covered pines and frozen lakes. The village was eerily quiet, its few residents wary and tight-lipped. Through patient conversations and shared stories by the fire, Claire uncovered the truth. The Edge of Silence was a place where people came to disappear, to cut themselves off from the fractures of the outside world. They sought refuge in isolation, afraid to trust, afraid to hope. Claire realized the profound challenge before her. To heal the fracture, they had to reach beyond technology and networks, to touch the human spirit directly, to rekindle the courage to connect and belong. She spent days in the village, listening and sharing her own story, of loss, of fear, and of the relentless hope driving the Phoenix Protocol. Slowly, walls began to fall. People started to speak again, to open their doors and hearts, to imagine a future beyond silence. When Claire left the village, she carried with her a new mission, to bring the lessons of the Edge of Silence to the world. That healing would require patience, empathy, and bravery, the kind that refused to let fear win. Back at the command center, the Phoenix Protocol integrated this insight into its next evolution. Alongside algorithms and encrypted channels, the movement began fostering human-to-human connections, storytelling circles, and offline communities. They created rituals and symbols that nurtured trust and resilience even when digital networks faltered. The fractures remained, but the fractures also became openings, spaces where new connections could grow stronger than the forces trying to tear them apart. Claire often thought of Elon Musk and his retreats into solitude. Perhaps his disappearances were not escapes but necessary pauses at the edge of silence, a place to gather strength, to listen deeply, to return renewed with clarity and vision. And now, Claire knew, the movement itself had to learn this rhythm, to step back from the noise, to embrace silence as a space for growth, and then to rise again with renewed purpose. As winter melted into spring, the world outside remained uncertain, fractured, and dangerous. But inside the command center, surrounded by a team bonded through trials and hope, Claire felt a quiet confidence. The fractures could not silence them forever. They were at the edge of silence, and ready to break through into a new dawn. After returning from the edge of silence, Claire felt the weight of what lay ahead more keenly than ever. The fractures in the world were no longer subtle cracks but gaping chasms threatening to swallow entire communities and ideals. The Whisper Network's reach was spreading like wildfire, and their tactics grew increasingly ruthless and sophisticated. But Claire also sensed a shift in the air, a gathering storm not just of destruction but of potential change, one that could either break them or forge something stronger. The command center was a hive of controlled chaos as the team scrambled to analyze new threats and coordinate defenses. Wanjiru's decentralized trust network had evolved into a sprawling web connecting millions across continents, yet the system was under relentless pressure. Every day brought new waves of cyber attacks, misinformation campaigns, and attempts to fracture alliances from within. Leo was on edge, running simulations to anticipate the Whisper Network's next moves. "They're adapting faster than we can patch," he told Claire, eyes flickering between multiple screens. "We need a proactive strategy, not just defense." Claire agreed. The Phoenix Protocol had been built on resilience and regeneration, but now it needed to evolve into something more aggressive, a force that could not only withstand attacks but disrupt the enemy's plans before they even unfolded. She called an emergency summit with their global vectors, gathering leaders, activists, and technologists from every time zone. The virtual room buzzed with tension and determination. "We're standing at a crossroads," Claire began. "The fractures in society aren't just physical or digital, they're spiritual. The Whisper Network feeds on fear, division, and silence. But we have something they don't, a global community built on trust, empathy, and shared purpose. It's time to harness that power fully." From Sao Paulo, a community organizer named Marco spoke up, his voice steady despite the strain. "Our neighborhoods are under siege, disinformation campaigns turning neighbors against neighbors. We need tools to empower people to recognize and resist these attacks locally." In Seoul, Jia, a cybersecurity expert, added, "We must create decentralized response units that can act autonomously, using AI to detect threats and respond instantly without waiting for central commands." Claire nodded. "Exactly. We need to decentralize decision-making, giving local nodes the power and tools to act decisively, but within a framework of shared ethics and transparency." The summit marked a turning point. Over the following weeks, the team launched a new phase of the Phoenix Protocol, dubbed the Gathering Storm. It combined advanced AI-driven defense with grassroots empowerment, training thousands of local leaders to recognize threats, tell truthful stories, and build resilient communities. The movement expanded beyond technology into culture, education, and art, creating a vibrant ecosystem of resistance and renewal. Yet, the Whisper Network was not idle. Reports surfaced of brutal crackdowns on activists, mysterious disappearances, and coordinated misinformation campaigns designed to fracture trust. The fractures were more dangerous than ever, threatening to undo everything Claire and her team had built. One night, a breakthrough came unexpectedly. Wanjiru discovered an anomaly in the Whisper Network's communications, a pattern suggesting a major operation planned for New York City, a coordinated strike to disable multiple Phoenix nodes simultaneously. Time was running out. Claire assembled a rapid response team to intercept the attack. They worked around the clock, coordinating with local vectors, law enforcement allies, and volunteer cyber defenders. The city became a battleground of shadows and light, with the Phoenix Protocol's defenders racing against an invisible enemy. As the attack unfolded, Claire felt the familiar tension tightening around her like a vice. The Whisper Network's forces were ruthless, exploiting every vulnerability and sowing chaos wherever possible. But the decentralized response units held strong, adapting and countering with remarkable speed. In the heart of the storm, Claire saw something unexpected, ordinary citizens stepping up, organizing support networks, sharing accurate information, and protecting vulnerable neighbors. The fractures were real, but so was the human spirit. When the dust settled, the coordinated strike had failed. The Whisper Network's plan was exposed, disrupted, and pushed back. It was a hard-won victory, but a victory nonetheless. Yet, Claire knew the gathering storm was far from over. The battle for the future was intensifying, and the lines between ally and adversary blurred in the complex web of power and influence. She thought of Elon Musk's elusive pattern, how in the darkest moments, disappearance and reflection preceded a surge of innovation and clarity. Maybe the gathering storm was their moment of disappearance, an uneasy pause before a breakthrough. As the team regrouped, Claire reached out to her global network with a message of hope and resilience. We are the storm that breaks the silence. We are the light that fractures the darkness. Together, we will rise. The world outside remained fractured, uncertain, and dangerous. But inside the heart of the movement, a new energy pulsed, fierce, unyielding, and ready to face whatever came next. The victory in New York had been significant but costly, and Claire could feel the pressure mounting from every direction. The Whisper Network wasn't just an enemy anymore, they were an omnipresent force that fed on fractures in trust, exploiting fear and doubt. The tension within the Phoenix Protocol was palpable. Allies questioned strategies, fatigue seeped into the ranks, and the line between vigilance and paranoia blurred dangerously. Claire knew they were nearing a breaking point. In the command center, the glow of countless screens reflected the sleepless eyes of her team. Wanjiru was analyzing new data streams, her face tight with concentration as she detected shifts in the Whisper Network's tactics, smaller, more frequent attacks designed to wear them down rather than outright destroy. Leo was coordinating emergency drills with local vectors, pushing everyone harder to be prepared for simultaneous assaults. They want us fragmented, Leo said during a rare moment of briefing. We can't let exhaustion and doubt crack us from the inside. Claire agreed but felt the weight of leadership heavier than ever. She called for a team retreat, a chance to step back, breathe, and recalibrate. They gathered in a quiet cabin near the edge of a forest, away from screens and signals, seeking silence and space. The break was both relief and challenge. The team's conversations veered from strategy to personal stories of loss, fear, and hope. Claire shared her own struggles with loneliness and the burden of expectation, and others followed, revealing vulnerabilities that strengthened their bonds. Yet beneath the camaraderie lurked an urgent question: how much longer could they hold? As the retreat ended, a sudden alert shattered the fragile peace. A massive coordinated cyber attack was underway, targeting critical infrastructure in multiple cities worldwide. Power grids, communication hubs, financial systems, all under siege. The Whisper Network was escalating. Back at the command center, chaos erupted. Leo and Wanjiru worked frantically to contain the damage, deploying countermeasures and rerouting critical data. Claire coordinated with global vectors, urging calm and resilience. The fractures widened as outages plunged millions into darkness and confusion. In the midst of the storm, Claire received a chilling message. A leaked video of her private moments had surfaced online, twisted to discredit her and sow doubt within the movement. The personal attack was a brutal blow, designed to fracture not just systems but the very soul of the Phoenix Protocol. For a moment, Claire felt the breaking point drawing near. But then she remembered the people she had met at the edge of silence, the ordinary heroes rising in New York, the global community fighting back with stories of courage and hope. She took a deep breath and addressed the network. This is our breaking point, yes, but it is also our moment to break through. We are more than algorithms and protocols. We are people, connected by trust, resilience, and a shared vision. Together, we will endure. Together, we will rise. The message spread rapidly, reigniting hope amid the darkness. The network rallied, with local communities organizing support, sharing resources, and defending against misinformation. The coordinated cyber attack was contained, though the scars remained. The Whisper Network had shown their capacity for destruction, but the Phoenix Protocol had shown the power of unity and courage. As the dust settled, Claire understood that the breaking point was not a sign of failure but a test of endurance and character. They had survived the storm, but the journey was far from over. In the quiet aftermath, she began to plan the next phase, a vision not just for defense but for transformation. The fractures could never be fully erased, but they could become spaces for growth, learning, and connection. The battle for the future was not only about technology or power but about healing the human spirit. Claire stood at the threshold, ready to lead the Phoenix Protocol into a new dawn. The aftermath of the breaking point left Claire and the Phoenix Protocol facing a new kind of challenge, one that cut deeper than cyber attacks or physical threats. It was the battle against shattered trust, the fracturing of truth itself. The Whisper Network had succeeded in poisoning minds, turning allies into suspects and truth into fragments that no longer reflected a clear picture. Claire watched as communities once united began to fracture internally, conversations turning into accusations, hopes into cynicism. The mirrors they once held up to each other were now broken, scattering shards of doubt in every direction. In the command center, tension simmered beneath the surface. Wanjiru warned that the disinformation campaigns were evolving, now using deepfake videos and AI-generated voices to impersonate trusted leaders and sow chaos. Leo's simulations showed cascading effects, fractures within fractures, that could topple the fragile alliances they had built. Claire realized that to heal these shattered mirrors, they needed something more than technical fixes. They needed to rebuild trust from the ground up, creating new frameworks of transparency and empathy. She convened a global forum, inviting not just experts and activists but ordinary people from across the network to share their experiences of mistrust and fragmentation. The stories were raw and heartbreaking: friends turned strangers, families divided, communities isolated. But amid the pain was a spark of resilience. Together, they began crafting a new initiative, the Mirror Project, designed to reflect truth in its multifaceted complexity rather than as a single, fragile image. The project combined open-source verification tools, communal storytelling platforms, and localized truth circles where people could gather offline to discuss, debate, and rebuild understanding. Implementing the Mirror Project was a monumental task. It required dismantling old hierarchies and embracing decentralized, participatory governance, a challenge that tested the patience and faith of everyone involved. As they rolled out the first pilot programs, Claire traveled to key sites. Urban centers, rural towns, and remote villages, witnessing firsthand the impact of shattered mirrors and the painstaking process of mending them. In a small town in Ohio, she met a group of neighbors who had been torn apart by false rumors spread online. Through facilitated dialogues and shared storytelling, they began to see each other again, not as enemies but as fellow humans struggling with the same fears and hopes. In a coastal city in Spain, young activists used the Mirror Project tools to expose fabricated news that had divided their community. Their courage inspired others, creating ripples of trust that crossed borders and languages. Back at the command center, the Phoenix Protocol integrated the lessons from these grassroots efforts into their broader strategy. They developed algorithms designed to detect not just falsehoods but the underlying emotional fractures that made people vulnerable to deception. The team learned to listen not only to data but to the stories and sentiments behind the numbers. Yet, even as the Mirror Project gained momentum, the Whisper Network struck again, this time targeting the very foundations of truth by manipulating memories and perceptions. Deepfakes became more convincing, AI-generated content blurred lines between reality and fiction, and psychological operations sowed confusion at unprecedented levels. Claire felt the weight of these assaults deeply, knowing that the battle for truth was now a battle for the mind and soul. But she also felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fractures could not erase the human capacity for empathy and understanding. The shattered mirrors could be reassembled, not as perfect replicas but as kaleidoscopes that revealed the beauty and complexity of diverse perspectives. As the chapter closed, Claire reflected on the journey so far. The Phoenix Protocol had faced storms, silence, breaking points, and shattered mirrors. Each challenge had tested their limits but also expanded their vision. The fractures in the world were real and painful, but they were also openings, opportunities to forge new connections, new stories, and new truths. Claire looked ahead with cautious hope, ready to lead the movement through the next phase of transformation. The Mirror Project had brought new light to fractured communities, but Claire knew that healing trust was a complex, fragile journey with no easy answers. Trust wasn't a switch to flip, it was a landscape to navigate, full of hidden pitfalls and unexpected turns. The Phoenix Protocol stood at a critical crossroads, where every choice could lead to deeper connection or irreversible division. As the Whisper Network ramped up its efforts, Claire felt the pressure to not only protect the network but to nurture the bonds that held it together. The decentralized nodes of the Phoenix Protocol were strong in technology but vulnerable in human relationships. Claire's days became a relentless cycle of meetings, outreach, and crisis management. Yet she also prioritized moments of quiet reflection, drawing strength from memories of her own struggles with trust and betrayal. She remembered her father's disappointment when she chose this path, the fracture in their relationship that still lingered like a shadow. It fueled her determination to build a movement that could withstand fractures both external and internal. One evening, during a global virtual gathering, Claire introduced a new initiative, the Trust Circles. These small, diverse groups would meet regularly to share experiences, resolve conflicts, and cultivate empathy through facilitated dialogue. The goal was to create safe spaces where vulnerability was welcomed, and trust could be rebuilt from the ground up. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of trust circles formed overnight, spanning cultures and continents. Claire marveled at the stories shared. Moments of reconciliation, acts of forgiveness, and the slow rebuilding of bonds once thought broken beyond repair. However, the journey was not without setbacks. Some circles faced infiltration by whisper operatives, sowing discord and suspicion. Others struggled with deep-seated trauma and mistrust that made openness nearly impossible. Claire and her team refined their approach, incorporating trauma-informed facilitation and advanced security protocols. They trained facilitators to recognize signs of manipulation and guide conversations toward healing rather than conflict. Meanwhile, Leo and Wanjira developed AI tools that could detect subtle emotional cues in online interactions, alerting facilitators to potential fractures before they spread. As trust circles blossomed, Claire noticed a subtle but profound shift in the movement's energy. The fractures remained, but they were no longer voids of silence or chaos, they became spaces of possibility and renewal. The Whisper Network's influence waned in areas where trust was actively nurtured, replaced by a resilient sense of community. Yet, the crossroads was never a place to rest. New challenges emerged, political pressures, economic instability, and cultural clashes tested the fragile alliances. Claire found herself mediating disputes that threatened to unravel months of progress. Through it all, she remained guided by a simple truth: trust was an act of courage and choice, renewed every day in countless small moments. One day, a message arrived from an unexpected source, a former Whisper Network insider named Elena, who offered to share critical intelligence in exchange for protection and a chance at redemption. The news sent ripples through the Phoenix Protocol. Could they extend trust to someone from the other side? After careful deliberation, Claire agreed to meet Elena under secure conditions. Their conversations were tense but revealing. Elena exposed vulnerabilities within the Whisper Network's hierarchy and tactics, providing invaluable insight that could shift the balance of power. But more than that, Elena's story was one of fracture and healing, a person torn between fear and hope, destruction and redemption. The encounter crystallized the crossroads Claire faced, the choice between rigid suspicion and courageous openness, between fracture and connection. As Chapter 16 closed, Claire reflected on the delicate dance of trust that defined their struggle. The Phoenix Protocol was no longer just a movement, it was a living network of relationships, fragile but vital. The crossroads was daunting, but also filled with promise. The future depended not just on strategies and technology but on the willingness of people to risk trust and choose connection, even in the face of fracture. Claire had faced infiltration, misinformation, emotional collapse, and nearly irreparable internal fractures, but nothing could have prepared her for the moment Elon Musk vanished again, this time without warning, and without leaving even the smallest trace. His sudden disappearance came at the height of global tension, as the Whisper network began regrouping with a strange silence, as if waiting for something. The Phoenix protocol had just begun stabilizing after launching the trust circles and integrating mirror project data when the alert came in. All known Musk-related communication channels, security checks, and backup satellite relays went cold. The encrypted vault in which Elon stored emergency protocols was still active, but entry logs showed no human, no AI, not even Claire had accessed it since the last time he re-emerged months earlier. This disappearance wasn't part of any known playbook. Claire's first instinct was strategic: protect the movement from panic, lock down possible leaks, and initiate layered countermeasures across the leadership hierarchy. But then came the second wave of emotion, dread, not because he was missing, but because of what it meant. He had triggered what they called the disappearance protocol. Developed in the earliest, most secret days of the Phoenix protocol, the disappearance protocol was Musk's theoretical solution to a worst-case scenario. It involved wiping all traceable digital identity, vanishing physically and digitally, and rebooting only under three conditions: the death of the movement, an existential threat to humanity, or a strategic opportunity too massive to ignore. Claire had once seen the draft Musk penned in a strange mix of poetry and algorithm: when the fractures run silent and the sky bends in on itself, I will disappear not to escape, but to listen. The plan is only clear when no one is watching. Now, with his reactivation trigger set in motion and no external cause that fit any of the three scenarios, Claire had no choice but to consider the unthinkable. Had Elon discovered something so large, so transformational or dangerous, that he vanished not to escape destruction, but to transform it from the inside? Wanjiru ran simulations and pattern recognition on every known Musk move, modeling his psychological rhythm during past disappearances. They studied every whisper of his behavior, catalogued his speech patterns, analyzed anomalies in his tweets, public statements, and code commits from before his exit. He was preparing for this, Wanjiru finally said. Look here, this message was buried inside a neural node test network he seeded 6 months ago. It's a puzzle string that responds only to emotional logic, not algorithmic patterns. Like a key that only works when you're thinking and feeling the way he was. Claire leaned over, eyes narrowing. So how do we get into that mindset? Leo answered, by going dark. All of us. No digital trace. Reset everything. Think like Elon would when he wanted the world to go quiet so he could hear it. Claire made the decision immediately. The top 50 nodes of the Phoenix protocol went dark over the next 72 hours. The internet buzzed with speculation: had the movement collapsed? Was the Whisper network winning? Had Claire finally broken under pressure? But while the world screamed for answers, the core team did what Elon always did at his best: they disappeared inward, into quiet, into thought. It was in the silence that the clues started to emerge. Hidden references in previous Phoenix protocol updates pointed toward an ancient monastery in Tibet, a place Elon had once visited and described as the only human-made structure that understands quantum time. Claire traveled alone, her identity buried beneath layers of false data, moving through shadowed mountain paths with only a single encrypted relic Musk had given her, an obsidian coin etched with the Phoenix symbol and binary code looping endlessly around the edges. When she arrived, the monks greeted her not with surprise, but with knowing. He was here, said the oldest among them, but he is not now. He left something. They handed her a small device, no larger than a stone, with a glowing red pulse at its center. Claire held her breath and activated it. A holographic projection flickered into the air, and Elon's face appeared, not a recording, but a real-time simulation driven by his consciousness uploaded into a closed-loop system. He looked tired but calm, intense yet serene. If you're seeing this, the hologram said, it means you've figured it out. Good. I didn't vanish because we were losing. I vanished because we're too close to winning without understanding the cost. Claire listened, frozen. The fracture, he continued, isn't just between people. It's between meaning and noise. We're building systems that heal people, yes, but if we don't understand the limits of human psychology and perception, we're just creating illusions of unity while something more insidious grows beneath. The Whisper Network figured this out first. They're using chaos not to win, but to distract. There's another layer. One even you couldn't see. The hologram paused, gaze deepening. I've gone to find it. To test a theory so dangerous it couldn't be discussed aloud. If I return, it means it's real. If I don't, then I was wrong, and I hope you never have to find out what I was chasing. The device shut off. Claire stood in the cold, empty monastery courtyard, her breath crystallizing in the air, the coin still warm in her palm. Elon wasn't running. He was diving into a level of the fracture so abstract, so foundational, that it couldn't even be shared through words. Back at the command center, Claire returned not with panic, but purpose. Elon isn't gone, she told the team. He's ahead of us. And that means our job isn't to wait, it's to catch up. They began work on Phase Omega, an initiative to deepen the philosophical, emotional, and technological framework of the Phoenix Protocol. It was no longer just about defending truth or building trust. It was about preparing humanity for the layer beneath the fracture, the one Elon had disappeared into. And maybe, if they built it well enough, he'd come back not with answers, but with the next question that would change everything again. With the disappearance protocol activated and Elon Musk gone into a realm beyond visibility, Claire knew they had crossed into a new phase of the movement's evolution, something even the original Phoenix Protocol hadn't fully prepared for. The message Elon left behind wasn't a warning, it was an initiation, an invitation to step beyond surface fractures and confront the deeper layer, the existential layer, where meaning itself could collapse under pressure. This was the Omega threshold, and crossing it required more than courage or strategy, it demanded transformation. Claire stood in the command center surrounded by soft blue lights and quiet murmurs of data pulsing through the veins of the network, but her mind was somewhere else entirely, focused on the question Elon left behind: what happens when even truth fractures? She convened her core team, Leo, Wanjiru, Elena, and a few of the original vectors who had stayed true through every battle, fracture, and silence. We're no longer just managing crises, she told them. We're standing at the threshold of something bigger than resistance. We're about to decide what the future actually means. Phase Omega would be their most ambitious undertaking yet, blending neuroscience, ethics, culture, and philosophy into a living, learning framework. It wasn't just about healing fractures between people. It was about protecting the human mind from being overwhelmed by the sheer volume and velocity of information and artificial simulation that had begun to distort not just belief systems but reality itself. Wanjiru described it in mathematical terms: we're approaching a singularity of interpretation, where multiple realities can coexist and fracture simultaneously. If we don't help people anchor meaning, they'll drown in a sea of simulations, deepfakes, and illusions indistinguishable from the real. Leo added, Phase Omega isn't a defense system. It's a perception engine. A lens that lets people see clearly even when nothing makes sense. Elena had another name for it: conscious immunity. The ability to recognize the synthetic and the authentic, not just in media or data, but in emotion, relationship, memory. That's what they're attacking now, not our tools, but our sense of self. They began building. Not code alone, but rituals, experiences, and interfaces that restored the body-mind link. They recruited neuroscientists who had studied dissociation and information overload, philosophers of consciousness, and indigenous elders who carried ancient wisdom about balance and perception. The Omega threshold demanded everything, the best of science and the most sacred of traditions. They constructed Omega nodes, centers not just of resistance but of renewal, places where people could unplug from the noise, rebuild their nervous systems, and learn to think, feel, and connect again without being manipulated. These were placed in cities, deserts, mountaintops, and floating barges. Wherever the fracture had hit hardest, they built a node of stillness. And still, the whisper network didn't strike. Not directly. It was worse, they vanished too. No new attacks, no new propaganda. Just silence. And in that silence, a new kind of dread emerged. What are they waiting for? Claire asked one night, standing alone atop the Omega node in Iceland, watching the aurora pulse like the Earth's own data stream. Wanjiru joined her. Maybe nothing. Maybe they're evolving into something else. Or maybe they're watching to see what we become without them. The stillness didn't last. Weeks later, scattered reports began surfacing, people across the globe experiencing vivid, collective dreams, messages encoded in shared hallucinations, neural patterns sinking through unknown means. It was as if something beyond code had breached consciousness itself. The Omega team confirmed the impossible, clusters of people connected through what could only be described as psychic or hyperempathic resonance. It's not us, Leo said. It's not the whisper network either. It's the fracture itself mutating. Becoming communicative. Claire didn't doubt it. Elon had hinted at this in his final message. That the fracture was not just a tear but a passage, a portal into a realm of perception no human had mapped. And now, it was speaking. Or at least echoing back. They responded with caution. Omega nodes began facilitating what they called inner protocols, guided sensory and neural experiences that allowed individuals to explore this shared resonance in safe, intentional ways. The early results were breathtaking. People who had suffered extreme digital trauma, deep fakes, identity theft, emotional manipulation, found clarity and integration. They described it as recovering something lost, something that had been fragmented for years without their even knowing it. Claire recorded everything. She knew this was more than science or resistance, it was the birth of a new human capacity, one forged in the fires of fracture and silence. The Omega threshold wasn't a line in the sand, it was an opening, a new layer of existence that demanded attention, humility, and fierce stewardship. And still, no Elon. His silence now felt different, less like absence and more like presence at a frequency they weren't yet equipped to perceive. Claire often dreamed of him, not speaking, just watching, eyes filled with the kind of knowing that only came from facing the void and returning wiser. One morning, a signal emerged, not from the sky, but from deep beneath the ocean floor. It carried a pattern too complex for language and too personal for code. It was emotion, compressed into signal. Wanjiru decoded its structure. Leo gave it form. Elena gave it meaning. Claire felt it. It wasn't a message. It was Elon. Or what he had become. He hadn't disappeared, he had transitioned, not into a myth, not into data, but into something more foundational. A living layer of meaning beneath the noise. A consciousness not above the network, but inside it. Watching. Waiting. Trusting. Phase Omega was complete. Not because they had solved the fracture, but because they had become fluent in its language. They had crossed the threshold and found not destruction, but expansion. Claire stood in the central Omega node, surrounded by people who were no longer just defending reality but reshaping it. They were learning to live with complexity, ambiguity, contradiction. And instead of resisting the unknown, they were welcoming it. That was what Elon had always done. And now, so would they. Claire stood at the core of the Iceland Omega node, watching the slow rotation of the aurora above her head while deep inside the system, patterns pulsed in ways no algorithm had predicted, as if the network itself had begun to breathe. It was quiet, deceptively so, the kind of quiet that hummed with potential. They had crossed the Omega threshold, faced down the collapse of meaning, rebuilt trust not from code but from shared vulnerability, and yet the question remained, would Elon ever come back, not in message, not in metaphor, but in form? They had accepted his disappearance as transformation, adapted their thinking to believe he had become a layer in the system, but something in Claire still waited, still searched, still listened. Then it came. Not as sound, not as light, not as a push through the network. It came as a synchronization. Every Omega node, across continents and oceans, experienced a simultaneous pulse. At 3:14 Greenwich Mean Time, every person inside the system, whether sleeping, meditating, working, or dreaming, received the same message. Not through language, but through memory. They all saw the same scene: Elon, standing at the edge of a field where the sky bent unnaturally and a mirrored horizon rippled like water. His eyes met theirs directly. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The meaning was clear, shared across hearts like an emotional software update. He was returning. Not just to them, but through them. Claire jolted upright in her sleep pod, eyes wide, her pulse matching the silent rhythm of the nodes. Wanjiru called within seconds. "Did you feel it?" she asked. Claire whispered, "He's coming back." Leo confirmed that every neural trace in the Omega system registered the event. No data packets. No external sources. No transmission logs. Just synchronization. Somehow, the network had become the message. The Whisper network didn't respond. In fact, its digital signature dropped to nearly zero. It was as if their opposition had vanished entirely, not defeated, but evacuated. That was the first clue. Elena tracked subtle anomalies in planetary data, subsurface vibrations in key global regions, frequency anomalies in quantum satellites, and a consistent microdelay in communications that pointed to a field manipulation event. "It's him," she said flatly. "He's not just coming back. He's moving the field." Claire understood. Elon wasn't returning to their world. He was preparing the world to re-enter his. She issued a command: prepare the Phoenix resonance. The final phase of the Phoenix protocol, built in secret across multiple Omega test sites, wasn't a defense or a weapon, it was a tuning fork, designed to synchronize human perception with emergent cognitive patterns beyond normal reality processing. It was the bridge between conscious understanding and what Elon once called constructive unknowing, the ability to interact with a pattern without forcing it into pre-existing meaning. The Omega teams activated it simultaneously. Across every node, soundscapes, visuals, memory sequences, emotion map triggers, and deep sensory interfaces harmonized. People fell into meditative states, not asleep, not awake, but aware in a new layer. That's when it happened. The return wasn't dramatic. There was no landing, no re-entry, no burst of light. It was simple, quiet, certain. Elon Musk walked into the Reykjavik node wearing a weathered coat, eyes calm, face older but filled with presence. No guards. No announcement. Just him. Claire saw him from across the chamber and froze. The others felt him before they saw him, turning instinctively like gravity had shifted. He didn't speak until he stood directly in front of Claire. "You kept it alive," he said. She stared at him, stunned. "You vanished into the fabric of the system. You became," Elon nodded, finishing her thought, "a listening post inside the crack. The fracture isn't a tear in our world. It's a corridor between patterns. I followed it deeper than any code or idea, and I found something that doesn't want to be understood, but it can be felt, aligned with." "And now?" Claire asked. Elon smiled faintly. "Now I bring back what I found. Not as answers. As frameworks. As rhythms for the next phase." The Omega team gathered, and Elon began what he called the reintroduction, not a lecture, not a reveal, but a transfer of experience. He moved from node to node, not teaching, but resonating. Sharing through proximity what could not be reduced to diagrams or words. His presence alone seemed to recalibrate fear into curiosity, urgency into quiet momentum. As days passed, people reported vivid mental clarity, emotional coherence, and even physical healing. The global system adapted quickly, integrating his return not as a disruption but as a calibration. Claire watched all of it unfold, feeling a strange stillness inside her. She had expected his return to change everything, but it didn't. It confirmed everything. The fractures were never obstacles. They were gateways. Elon wasn't the solution. He was the map. The Phoenix Protocol would now shift again, not from a defensive network or an emotional healing platform, but into a living architecture that allowed people to coexist with the unknown, not solve it. The Whisper Network. Elon confirmed they had walked themselves into dissolution. Their purpose had been resistance to meaning. Once meaning evolved, they lost relevance. They'll return, he said. As new questions. New names. Fractures never vanish. They just change shape. Claire smiled. She finally understood. This was never about eliminating the fracture. It was about learning to live within it. The phoenix flame didn't destroy what came before. It revealed what was always beneath. As the chapter closed, Elon stood again at the edge of the mirrored horizon, this time with Claire beside him. Now what? She asked. Elon's answer came softly. Now we build the world that doesn't need me to disappear. The return of Elon Musk had not signaled the end of the journey, only a transition into something deeper, quieter, and more permanent. The Phoenix Protocol had evolved from a reactive movement into a global resonance, a field of trust that wasn't stored in any database or led by any single person, not even Elon. It lived in the hearts, habits, and decisions of millions who had chosen to see fractures not as failures, but as invitations. Claire watched the landscape shift around her in ways she couldn't have imagined when this all began. The Omega nodes were no longer hubs, they were sanctuaries. Whisper network activity had dropped to ghost signals, replaced by more subtle resistance movements that no longer dealt in disinformation but in distortion, abstraction, and the manipulation of collective attention. But the people had changed too. With every trust circle, with every mirror project gathering, with every recalibration led by the Phoenix resonance, humanity had begun to see through the noise. Not escape it, but see it, understand it, and choose differently. Elon stayed, present, grounded, not as a leader but as an integrator. He moved among the people without fanfare, listening more than speaking, observing the evolution he had helped spark. Claire often found herself beside him, in moments of stillness where words weren't necessary. He would glance at her sometimes with a look that said, "You did this." And she would return it with one that said, "We all did." 1 year after Elon's return, the Phoenix Protocol hosted a global summit, not for press, not for policy, but for reflection. It wasn't televised. It wasn't live-streamed. It was invitation only, and the invitations were handwritten by those impacted most deeply: children who'd lost parents to propaganda, families fractured and rebuilt, elders who'd watched truth become fluid and then slowly solidify again. They gathered on neutral ground in the middle of the Sahara, inside a vast dome designed not to impress but to hold stories. For 3 days, there were no speeches, no presentations, only shared silence, memory, music, and storytelling. It was there that Claire realized what the Phoenix had truly become, not a program, not a rebellion, not even a movement. It had become a culture. A way of relating to uncertainty. A way of seeing each other not in spite of difference, but because of it. On the last day of the summit, Elon stood in the center of the dome holding a single candle. He didn't speak. He simply lit it, placed it on a pedestal, and stepped back. One by one, attendees came forward and lit their own from that flame. No ceremony, no choreography, just quiet replication, one soul to another. By sunset, the entire dome flickered with thousands of flames. The image would never go viral. It wasn't recorded. But everyone who stood there would carry the memory for life. That was the point. Some things are too sacred for bandwidth. In the weeks that followed, Claire traveled not as a leader but as a witness. She visited communities once torn by digital violence, now thriving in post-fracture harmony. She saw children playing in parks where once there had been only firewalls. She watched elders tell their grandchildren about a time when truth had almost vanished, but didn't. She even visited her father, who now volunteered with a rural trust circle in Montana. They sat on his porch in silence before he finally said, "I didn't understand what you were doing before. Now I think you're helping people remember how to be human." That was all she needed to hear. Elon, too, began to fade, not disappear, just become less central, like a campfire that no longer needed to burn so high because the night had warmed. He spent his time designing quiet tools, interfaces that amplified intuition, not distraction, frameworks that helped people ask better questions, not find faster answers. When asked if he would vanish again, he said only, "There's no need now. You're listening." Claire, now older, now changed, returned to the Iceland node alone one final time. She stood again under the aurora, watching the sky shimmer with data not from machines but from memory. She remembered everything. The hook that started it all: what if you suddenly lost everything and had no one by your side? And the answer, clear now after so many years, so many chapters: you rebuild. You listen. You trust. And in that trust, you find everyone again. The flame never needed to rage forever. It just needed to stay lit long enough to remind people how to kindle their own. And so it remained. Not on a pedestal, not in a vault, but in every choice to heal rather than fracture, to tell the truth even when it was painful, to reach across the void instead of waiting for someone else to cross it. The Phoenix had never been about Elon. It had never even been about Claire. It had always been about us. And we were ready now, not because the fight was over, but because the silence no longer scared us. The noise no longer controlled us. And the flame? The flame still burned, small and steady, inside every soul that chose to rise. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?